Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Terry, for inviting me to share in this time with you. And greetings from my home in Memphis, Tennessee, the birthplace of rock and roll, the home of Graceland, Elvis Presley, FedEx World Headquarters, barbecue, and dry ribs. And why anybody would want to eat dry ribs, I don't know. But greetings from Memphis, and it's good to be with you this week. Like many of you, I made the choice of going on a short-term mission trip many years ago. In 2005, I was in Afghanistan teaching leaders in the central government, and at the end of our time, we went to Chicken Street to buy goodies to bring back to our supporters and friends and family. And 3 little girls followed me around, learned my name, and trying to sell me the little trinkets that they had. I looked at these girls. They were covered in dirt. Their clothes were soiled. They had dirt on their hands. And I saw my granddaughter's face on theirs, and it broke my heart. I went back to the guest house that night to eat dinner, and you may have had that feeling before. The food stuck right here. I had a hard time swallowing. And I felt this burden. I looked at them and I looked at the leaders I was training, and I felt somebody has to make a difference with these leaders. Somebody has to stop this madness. And later in the next year, the Lord gave me a direct call to begin doing what I've been doing since 2006, and that's equipping leaders and changing the way leaders see themselves and see their world. And so it's a privilege to be joined with you today. We work in the same field. We sometimes have a different focus. And I've been asked to share something about values-based leadership during times of crisis. Values-based leadership during times of crisis. And I want to begin by saying all leadership is values-based. It's either good or bad, helpful or harmful, but all leadership is values-based. And a crisis is job security for leaders. It's why we exist. If there were no crises, if we weren't living in a broken world, there'd be no need for leadership. And so while we tend to complain and grumble about the challenges that we face, they're job security for us. And a crisis, if we could, we're on the next slide. A crisis is like gold being refined by fire. The gold is stuck, and when we're in a crisis, we're stuck. We can't get out of the bowl. We can't stop it. It moves from uncomfortable to extremely painful. Things begin to cook out of me and you that we don't like what we see. Impurities emerge. We battle fear and anger. What's the future going to hold? Why is this happening to me? Who's to blame for this? We have an absolute loss of control and no choice in the matter. And in the end, life is never really the same. And that describes COVID, I think, for many of us, what it's done to us in our ministries. I ended 2019 with a robust plan for ministry in 2020. Every one of you laughs. That's the way we all experienced it. I now call 2019 1 BC, one before COVID. That's how I look at it. Life was different in 2019. I made it through 2 months of ministry plans, and then things began to be canceled. I was frustrated, angry, and it wasn't just the plans on a piece of paper. It's the people, the mission, the ministry, the purpose, the lives that I was engaged with that I couldn't be with. And so While we were flattening the curve, I was extending this curve. You know, my recreation for the day was standing in front of my food pantry, figuring out what I could eat next. Some of you went through that. I quit using deodorant, washing my hair, wearing sweatpants and t-shirts every day, didn't get a haircut, didn't shave, and just kind of sat isolated from the body of Christ, from church, from ministry, and from most everything that had been important in my life. My children didn't want me to see my grandchildren. They were afraid that they would give me COVID, and they didn't want to be responsible for ending my life. And so I was isolated from family. And Zoom just did not cut it. Zooming my grandchildren wasn't the same thing as a hug. And I read a report from a like-minded think tank at the beginning of this, and they said this is either a blizzard or a long winter or an ice age. In a blizzard, you hunker down, you isolate, stay safe, and you dig out when it's over. In the winter, you know it's going to be cold for a little while, but you look forward to spring and you start making plans for when the thaw comes and when the warmth comes back. But for an ice age, that is a long, drawn-out period of time, and we need to adjust to it if it's an ice age. And their advice was to treat COVID as an ice age. Their advice was to do what we tell people in developing nations: take responsibility for the circumstances that you're in and make wise choices according to the values that you have that are good. And I didn't like that advice. I kept planning. I kept planning trips and canceling trips throughout the rest of the year. And yet that message of responsibility stuck with me. And through that time, I began to see that life probably never would be the same. And since all values are internal, my purpose this morning is to look at what takes place internally in our hearts and lives as we walk through a time of crisis. And I'm going to use two examples. One is a secular model, Nelson Mandela, and a biblical model from the book of Daniel. And if we're going to make it through and emerge from this with a sense of personal responsibility and renewed vision and purpose, we're going to walk through the process of refinement. And this is what it looks like as we walk through this. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years, as you know, in prison. He was held in 3 different prisons. He was treated horribly. They put him in forced labor. They wouldn't let him sing. The guards every day would find new ways to antagonize and commit acts of injustice against Nelson and the other prisoners that were there. He suffered greatly, and the crisis ruined most people, but not Nelson Mandela. He emerged a different person, a transformational leader. And he learned to release bad values, to build good values, and to adopt new values that would take him through the future. And I want to unpack that over the next couple of minutes. You see, some values that we have are harmful. Nelson Mandela lived in a terrible situation. Racism, apartheid, the injustices that he experienced gave rise to anger. He became a terrorist, and he thought that violent revolution was the key to a better future for South Africa. He was in prison not for peaceful protest, but he was in prison for being a violent terrorist and for his bombings, his actions in bombings in South Africa. While he was in prison, he took a long look at himself and realized that terrorism was not the key to building a better future, that violence was not the path. And in prison, the crisis the heat began to boil to the surface things that he saw that he decided that he did not like about himself. As we've gone through COVID, things have boiled up in us that if we take a look at, we may not like if we look at carefully. I came here early to Phoenix and took advantage of some of nature's wonders around this hot city. We went to the Grand Canyon, and on our Grand Canyon tour, I made a couple of friends. My wife and I made a couple of friends with a tour that we had, and this young man was interested in leadership, and so we started talking about leadership and leadership principles, building bridges of relationship. And he asked me, what do you think is the most important factor for a leader? And I thought for a minute, and off the cuff I said, self-awareness. You see, most leaders don't have self-awareness. When I go in and do leadership training in other countries and in businesses here, what you experience is the leader will say, our people need these things. And you go to the people and they say, yeah, we need these things, but our leader doesn't practice it. I walked into a capacity building director's office in the Amara region in Ethiopia, gave him my business card. I had an appointment with the president of the region that was put off because he was so busy, and he delegated it to his capacity building director. And I gave him my card, and it said leadership development on it, threw it on the table, and said, that's what I do. And so I smiled, and I said, I noticed in all of your buildings, your government buildings around the Amara region, you have 10 values that you say is important for you. And he smiled and he said, yes. And I started naming the values. He was happy that I could remember them. I was happier than he was as we walked through them. And I said, leaders, everyone comes into this building in the morning to go to work, and the leader measures everyone in this building except for one person. Who does he leave out? And he said himself. And I said, would you be interested in leadership training that helps leaders develop self-awareness? That's what a crisis does for us. A crisis opens up our eyes to see things that we never saw about ourselves before. And that's what COVID has done. Some of us have walked through anger. Some of you may still be angry or fearful or frustrated. And you think that COVID has done this to you. You think the government has done this to you. You think that the press has done this to you. You think the CDC or WHO has done this to you. No, the crisis has brought out what was already there. Nothing new, just unaware. And one of the great values of a crisis is that we get to see ourselves like we really are. That mixture has existed so long, we've gotten used to it. And now it's boiled to the surface. The second thing that happens in a crisis that for transformational leaders is we get to look at values that are good and build them. While the crisis prunes out things we don't need, we also begin to focus on things that bear fruit. Mandela wrote to his wife in 1975 from prison, at least for nothing else, the cell gives you the opportunity to look daily into your entire conduct, to overcome the bad and develop whatever is good in you. And so the time for Mandela was not wasted. He began to focus on those things that would move him and his nation forward while he was isolated in the cell. Years ago, I was going through a crisis, and I was frustrated. I felt like my feet were stuck in mud, and I didn't know what to do. And I recalled a verse that was very popular in my early days when I was on staff with Crew. And it was the verse from Daniel 11:32. We all knew it by heart. But they who know their God will display strength and take action. Well, I love that verse. But I wasn't feeling very strong in the crisis, and I wasn't very active. And so I wanted to look at that verse more closely. And so I dug in and found that this was in the context of the work of Antiochus Epiphanes, the forerunner of the Antichrist. And Israel is pictured in crisis here. And we're told that there will be those who know their God will be strong and take action in that crisis. I like that. And then I read the next verse. And those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many. That was my ministry, giving insight to many. That's your ministry. That's your platform. That's what you're doing. You know your God. You take action. That's why you're here. That's why you're engaged in Shea. And you're giving insight to many through your ministry. And I love that. Then I started reading on. And it says, after they give insight to many, yet they will fall. And he uses this word fall 3 times. The picture in the Hebrew is that they go to war and they lose. They're in a sporting contest and they lose. And so he says, yet they will fall, they will lose, they will fail by sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. It's going to last a while. And now when they fall, they will be, again the word fall, they will be granted a little help. That seems like COVID, doesn't it? We're in the middle of this and we get a little help. We're sustained, we're moving forward, but not very fast. And many will join them in hypocrisy. What that is saying is there's some people that will show up to help, but they're really not our friends. There's so many people that have bought into another gospel in our culture and around the world. They've believed a gospel that leaves out repentance, that leaves out change of life. There's so many people that say, I was in Afghanistan and I was in the guest house and there's a team there, and one of the young ladies on the team said, I don't believe Jesus is the only way to God. I had 15 minutes to go to leave for the airport, and that began a very rapid conversation. Why was she joined with a ministry team there? People who do not have a genuine relationship with God have a void in their heart. And ministering to the poor is acting according to the image of God that we all carry, and it fills that emptiness temporarily, and it makes people feel good, and then they leave. And so there are many people that will help the poor. They do it because it makes them feel good, not because they have a genuine relationship with God. And it says they will join in hypocrisy, and some of those who have insight, talking about us again, will fall, a third time fail, to refine, to purge, and to cleanse them until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. What's he saying here? What's Daniel telling us? He's telling us that we who know God and take action and speak truth, our lives are not entirely consistent with the words that we speak. And it takes a crisis, it takes an event, it takes a heating, a purging to boil up what's impure so that we can see it and remove it, so that we'll be pure and our lives will align with our message. We need to align with the values that we have. That's what the think tank was saying. Whatever your values are, use them in the context that you live. And these things that we're going through are purifying us. The last thing, essential values must improve. Not essential values. New values are born. new values emerged. This happened with Nelson Mandela. He received word that the sports committee was meeting and that they had made a decision. They were all black. They hated the whites that were once in control. The whites played rugby, Springbok rugby. And they had just voted to eliminate rugby as a sport in South Africa. Nelson Mandela heard this. He jumped in his limousine and went to the sport committee meeting. And I have a clip from the movie Invictus of what he said. So if we could play that clip.
I am aware that it was unanimous. Nonetheless, I believe we should restore the Springboks. Restore their name, their emblem, and their colors immediately. Our enemy is no longer the Afrikaner. They are our fellow South Africans, our partners in democracy. And they treasure Springbok rugby. If we take that away, we lose. I know. All of the things they deny us. But this is no time to celebrate petty revenge. This is the time to build our nation. You elected me your leader. Let me lead you now.
You see, all of them went through the same crisis. Only one emerged a transformational leader. His new value, people, all people, whatever color. We need every brick to build this nation. Things emerged that didn't exist before the crisis in our lives, in our ministry, but not for everyone. And the process that God takes us through in refinement leads to a better way of doing things. I'm taking that by faith. This is my first airline trip since January 2020. This is my first conference. This is the first time that I've spoken to people live. I'm rusty. I don't know what's going to emerge out of this. But I know that God has a future for us because we value people. We value the Great Commission. We value the work that's in front of us. The task is not done. We're going to find new ways to do the things that He's called us to.